The phone call came at 3 in the morning, and Mario Jiménez knew before his father spoke that something had gone terribly wrong. His father's voice cracked across the bad connection from Guatemala, mixing with static and the sound of his mother crying in the background. They wanted more money, another $5,000, or they'd never see their son again. But that call wouldn't come for another 2 weeks. First, there was a betrayal. Mario had left Guatemala City on a Tuesday morning in February, carrying nothing but a backpack with 2 changes of clothes and a phone number of a coyote named El Guero sewn into the lining of his jacket. $5,000, his family's entire savings plus loans from 3 different relatives, had already been wired to the smuggler's associates. It was supposed to buy safe passage to Houston, where his cousin had a job waiting at a meat packing plant. The bus ride north took 3 days, through Guatemala's highlands, where indigenous women sold textiles at rest stops, through Mexico's southern states, where checkpoints meant bribes and guards who pretended not to see the obvious migrants huddled in back seats. By the time they reached Reynosa, just across from McAllen, Texas, Mario's group had grown to 12 people. There was Lucia, a nurse from Honduras whose hospital had been taken over by gangs. The Salvadoran family, parents and 2 teenage daughters, fleeing death threats. An old man from Nicaragua who said little but whose hands shook constantly. They'd all paid the same price. They'd all been promised the same thing. El Guero met them at a safe house that smelled like fear and unwashed bodies. He was younger than Mario expected, maybe 30, with bleached hair and expensive sneakers. He smiled too much, laughed too loud, kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. The plan was simple, he explained. Tomorrow night, they'd cross the Rio Grande in rafts. Border Patrol had been paid to look the other way at a specific spot. Once across, vans would be waiting to take them to Houston. 8 hours, start to finish. By Thursday morning, they'd be starting their new lives. The safe house was a concrete box with barred windows and a single bathroom for 40 people. Mario found a corner and tried to sleep, but the nervous energy was contagious. Lucia prayed quietly with her rosary. The Salvadoran daughters whispered about what American high school would be like. Everyone pretended not to notice the armed guards outside. He called his father that night, keeping his voice steady. Everything was fine. The crossing would be easy. He'd call from Houston in 2 days. His father's relief was audible across the miles. They'd sacrificed so much for this chance. Sold the truck, that was their livelihood, borrowed against the house. Mario was the family's future now, their investment in something better. The betrayal came the next evening, just as the sun was setting. El Guero arrived with 4 other men, but something was different. These weren't his usual crew. They wore military-style boots and carried assault rifles like they knew how to use them. Their faces were hard, scarred, with the dead eyes of men who crossed too many moral lines to count. Mario watched El Guero's smile falter as the new men took positions around the room. The lead gunman, a thick-necked man with Sinaloa cartel tattoos, announced that plans had changed. There would be no crossing tonight. El Guero owed money to the wrong people, and debts had to be paid. They were the payment. The coyote tried to protest, his voice climbing toward panic. This wasn't the deal. These people had already paid. He had arrangements, schedules, people expecting them. The gunman backhanded him casually, dropping him to his knees. Blood splattered the concrete floor. That's when everyone understood. They weren't migrants anymore. They were merchandise. The next hours blurred together in a haze of terror. They were loaded into trucks at gunpoint, El Guero bleeding and babbling apologies no one believed. The Salvadoran family tried to stay together, the father shielding his daughters with his body. Lucia clutched her rosary so tight her knuckles went white. The old Nicaraguan man just stared straight ahead, like he'd always known it would end this way. They drove for hours through darkness, leaving the border city behind. Mario tried to track their route, but the roads all looked the same. Eventually they arrived at another safe house, this one more like a warehouse, surrounded by chain link and razor wire. More guards, more guns, no pretense of protection anymore. Inside, they joined dozens of other migrants in the same situation. The room stank of sweat and terror and human waste. People huddled in groups, some crying, some praying, some sitting in shocked silence. A woman near the door had bruises on her face. A man in the corner moaned from what looked like broken ribs. The rules were explained by a guard who enjoyed his work too much. Everyone would call their families. They'd ask for $5,000 more. The money would be wired to specific accounts. Once payment was confirmed, they'd be released at the border. Anyone who couldn't pay stayed until they could. Anyone who caused trouble would be made an example. Mario's hands shook as he dialed his father's number. How could he explain? How could he say that the money meant to save him had been stolen, that he needed the same amount again? His family had nothing left to give. They'd already borrowed against everything they owned. His father answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep and worry. Mario tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The guard pressed the gun barrel against his temple, a gentle reminder. So he talked, explained the situation in a hollow voice. Listened to his father's shocked turn to despair, turned to desperate determination. They would find the money. His father promised. Somehow, give him 3 days. A week at most. The guard snatched the phone away, barked instructions about wire transfers and account numbers, then moved to the next victim. 3 days became a week. A week became 2. The warehouse was a special kind of hell. They slept on concrete floors, ate beans and stale tortillas once a day, used buckets for bathrooms. Guards entertained themselves with casual cruelty. A kick here, a punch there, just enough to maintain fear, without damaging the merchandise too badly. Some people's families paid quickly. They disappeared in the night, hopefully released as promised. Others couldn't raise the money. The woman with the bruised face stopped eating after the first week. The man with broken ribs developed a fever that turned him delirious. No one talked about what happened to those who got too sick to be valuable. Mario watched Lucia try to keep people's spirits up. She tended injuries with torn cloth and prayer, shared her meager food with the Salvadoran girls, held the hands of those who cried in the night. Even in hell, some people remained human. The guards had a special cruelty for the pretty ones. The Salvadoran daughters never left their parents' sight, but everyone could see the guards watching, waiting. Their father aged 10 years and 2 weeks, knowing he was powerless to protect them if the guards decided waiting wasn't fun anymore. On the 10th day, they brought in a new group. Among them was a teenager, maybe 16, traveling alone. He reminded Mario of himself at that age. Scared but trying to hide it, desperate to prove he was man enough for the journey. The boy ended up in Mario's corner, shell-shocked and silent. That night, Mario shared his blanket and what little food he'd saved. The boy's story came out in whispers. His name was Carlos. His village in Guatemala had been destroyed by mudslides. His parents were dead. He'd used the insurance money to pay a coyote, planning to reach an uncle in California. Now he had no money left and no one to call. Mario knew what happened to people with no one to call. On the 14th day, Mario was summoned to the phone again. His father's voice sounded broken, aged. They'd gotten the money, sold the house to a predatory lender for half its value, borrowed from the kind of people who break legs when payments are late, but they'd gotten it. The relief should have been overwhelming. He was going to survive, going to be released. But looking around the warehouse, at Lucia still tending the sick, at the Salvadoran family still huddled together, at Carlos trying to disappear into the shadows, Mario felt only shame. His freedom was built on his family's destruction. His American dream had cost him everything. The next morning, they called his name. Time to go. He gathered his few possessions, avoided the eyes of those staying behind. At the door, he hesitated. Carlos was watching from the corner, trying to smile, trying to be brave. Mario knew that look. It was the face of someone who'd already accepted their fate. He couldn't leave the boy. Mario turned to the guard, asked if he could speak to the boss. The guard laughed, but curiosity won. The boss turned out to be the same thick-necked man who'd taken them from El Guero. He listened to Mario's proposition with amused contempt. The money his family had sent, let it cover 2 people, him and the boy. They could split the payment, release them both. The boss found this hilarious. Did Mario think this was a charity? A negotiation? The price was $5,000 per head. No discounts. No deals. But Mario had learned something in 2 weeks of hell. These men were businessmen first, sadists second. They wanted money, not bodies. So he made a different offer. Release the boy now, and Mario would work off the debt. His cousin in Houston had connections. He could pay installments. Interest, whatever they wanted. The boss considered this. A bird in hand versus two in the bush. Finally, he shrugged. The boy could go. But Mario would carry a debt now. They'd know where to find him in Houston. They'd know who to hurt if he tried to run. He was buying the boy's freedom with his own. Mario agreed. They drove them to the river that night, Mario and Carlos together. Dumped them on the Mexican side with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The Rio Grande stretched before them, dark and indifferent. On the other side, America glowed with electric light. Carlos couldn't stop thanking him, crying, promising to pay him back someday. Mario just nodded, numb. They both made it out. They both survived. But survival and freedom weren't the same thing. They crossed together, wading through muddy water that came up to their chests. No guards, no rafts, no protection. Just two people desperate enough to risk drowning for a chance at something better. On the American side, they ran until their lungs burned, expecting spotlights and sirens that never came. A truck stop, a sympathetic driver, a ride to Houston. That took until dawn. Mario's cousin was waiting, had been waiting for 2 weeks, sick with worry. He took them in, fed them, didn't ask too many questions about the boy or why Mario looked like he'd aged a decade. Within a week, both were working. Carlos at a car wash. Mario at the meat plant his cousin had promised. The work was hard, bloody, soul-crushing. But it was work. Honest money they could send home. Carlos sent his first paycheck to Mario's father. A tiny payment on an impossible debt. Mario sent nothing. How could he? His family had already given everything. 3 months later, the thick-necked man found him. Not in person. These men had employees for that. Just a reminder that debts were owed. Interest was accumulating. They knew where he worked, where he lived, where his family in Guatemala tried to rebuild their lives. Payment plans could be arranged, or other arrangements could be made. Mario paid. Every month, a chunk of his earnings went to men whose names he never knew. Blood money. Freedom tax. The cost of saving one boy from a warehouse full of the damned. His cousin asked once where the money went. Mario just shook his head. Some stories were too heavy to share. He worked double shifts, triple when they'd let him. Carlos did the same, pooling their money, paying down a debt that seemed to grow rather than shrink. They lived like ghosts, afraid to build anything that could be taken away, afraid to dream of more than survival. A year passed. Mario's father called less often, the shame mutual and unspoken. His mother had developed a cough that wouldn't go away. No money for doctors now. His younger siblings had dropped out of school to work. The family he left to save was drowning, and he was too busy treading water to throw them a line. Carlos thrived despite everything. Young enough to adapt, smart enough to learn English quickly, driven by a debt he could never truly repay. He studied at night, earned his GED, talked about community college. In him, Mario saw what he might have been if the coyotes hadn't sold them. If the American dream hadn't turned into an American trap. The thick-necked man's employees came by monthly, professional, polite. They knew Mario would pay because he'd seen what happened to those who didn't. The warehouse haunted him. Lucia's prayers, the Salvadoran daughter's fear, the fevered dreams of the dying. He'd bought his freedom with their suffering, survived by leaving others behind. 2 years now. The debt shrinks slowly, poisoned by interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. Carlos has a girlfriend. Talks about marriage, about papers to asylum claims. He's building a life. Mario just exists, caught between the hell he escaped and the heaven he can't afford to enter. He thinks about El Guero sometimes. Wonders if the coyote survived his own betrayal, if he's still selling false promises to desperate people. The border is full of such men, parasites feeding on hope. But worse are the ones who buy what the coyotes sell. The cartels that turn human smuggling into human trafficking. the businessman who sees suffering as a revenue stream. Mario made it to America, crossed the river, found work, sends what little he can to Guatemala. By any measure, he succeeded where thousands fail. But success tastes like ash when you know its price. When you wear chains no one else can see. When your freedom is mortgaged to men who sell human beings like cattle. Late at night, in the apartment he shares with 4 other workers, Mario lies awake and remembers. Not the crossing or the warehouse or the fear. He remembers the moment he decided to save Carlos. The moment he chose someone else's life over his own freedom. It wasn't heroism. It was just the only choice that let him remain human. The debt will be paid eventually. The thick-necked man will find other victims. The warehouse will fill with new faces. The cycle will continue because desperation is a renewable resource and America's appetite for cheap labor is infinite. But somewhere in Houston, a young man named Carlos is building a future because Mario Jiménez remembered what it meant to be human in a place designed to strip humanity away. It's not redemption. It's not victory. It's just proof that even in the darkest corners of the American dream, sometimes people choose light. Mario works another shift, sends another payment, carries another day of weight that will never fully lift. He crossed the border, but never really arrived. He's free, but forever chained. He survived, but isn't sure he's alive. This is what $5,000 buys on the border. Not passage, but bondage. Not freedom, but a different kind of cage. Not the American dream, but its shadow, where coyotes sell people, and everyone pretends not to see the price tag hanging from their necks. His name is Mario Jiménez. He made it to America. He's still trying to figure out if it was worth it.